Crew talks it over amongst themselves for a few minutes, and then we hear them call out engine start. And I had a little bit of trouble in the control technique for the first few seconds, but they catch on real quick, and boy, they really zeroed in this Earth reference. We hear them call shutdown 14 seconds later. We track them for about a half hour. Doggone if it didn't work, they're right back within the capture track that we need for Earth entry. Now, for the next 24 hours, the crew doesn't have anything to do except watch the Earth grow larger and larger and larger and larger and wonder how we're going to get them back through the Earth's atmosphere. The basic problem we essentially have three spacecrafts up there. We have the lunar module, we have the command module, which is our reentry, and we have the service module where the explosion occurred. At the very last moment, as we're entering into the Earth's atmosphere, we have to maneuver into an orientation so we can separate these three pieces at different times so they'll follow different reentry trajectories. But before we do that, we have to evacuate from the lunar module, leaving it controlling orientation, get into command module, rapidly and efficiently power this guy up, initialize computer, close hatch, check orientation, then start blowing the pieces apart. This is a checklist that will turn out to be about 500 entries long. Landing minus 24, I walk over the simulators to find out how the procedures are going. Ken Mattingly, the astronaut scrub from the mission, Tom Stafford and Gene Cernan have been working these for me, and they feel the procedures are ready to go. But Mattingly asks a very peculiar question. He says, you know, Flight, one thing I'd like to do is give them to a crewman who has never seen them and go through it a final time. And we agree that's a good, very, very good cross-check. So we reset the deadline back to landing minus 18. Landing minus 18, we get the Capcoms voicing the instructions up to the crew. That's going to be Vance Brand and Charlie Duke, who are the Capcoms for that shift. My Capcoms, Ken Mattingly and Joe Kerwin, are standing by listening as we voice the instructions up. We work with Jack Swigert for about 2 hours, and he reads back the procedures for us. And we're convinced he understands his part of the job. Then we start working with Fred Hayes. Unknown to us on the ground, Fred has uncontrollable shivers. Severe dehydration, bad urinary infection, body temperatures 102 and increasing. But Fredo's the guy that has to get the job done, so we work with him until he understands his part of the job. Then we all go off and get a few hours rest before we come in for our final shift. We're at landing minus 8 hours now, and I always have my teams go off, get by themselves, get focused upon their role in this particular shift, come back in to give me a green light indicator when they're ready. When I have an all-green board, I send my flight surgeon around to interview them to see if they're going to need a stimulant to keep them going. Virtually all the controllers refuse. They're going to do it on black coffee and cigarettes. I put on the white vest, which has been my team's trademark since the very early days in spaceflight. Poll the controllers for the start of the shift status, and they report in. They're sharp, they're crisp, they're on top of the job. I'm so damn proud of these kids I could croak. Then I get concerned, Nazi adrenaline, we're peaking too soon. Don't even have that luxury. Jerry Bostic, my trajectory controller, comes up to me at the console, leans over, and he says, Flight, I hate to tell you this, we're going to miss the Earth. We must perform an emergency maneuver. Now we have no choice but to use our very precious electrical power, and we're going to have to make adjustments, power profile downstream, but we voice the instructions up to the crew for the maneuver. We get the program 40 loaded on board the LIM guidance computer, then we provide the orientation for the maneuver. And throughout this entire period of time, their guardian angel is Joe Kerwin. Joe is the principal communicator through these final 8 hours, and he's a medical doctor. He'll be the first doctor in space on the Skylab 2 mission, and his bedside manner, not only here but through the remainder of the shift, is absolutely spectacular. Maneuver is completed. Now it's time to jettison the service module. Crew calls off service module jettison, and there's about a 45-second pause as they maneuver into orientation to give us some reports, and then they start, okay, I've got her. The whole side of the spacecraft's missing all the way to the high-gain antenna. The whole side is missing to the base of the engine. And Hayes says, yeah, it looks like it might have got the engine also because there's nothing but a dark brown streak by the injector. And as I'm listening to these reports, I'm thinking about the decision made almost 4 days earlier based on nothing but a gut feeling. And I cannot describe to you how intense that feeling was. And there's several people several controllers have experienced this, Glenn Lunny in particular. Some point where you've done absolutely the best that you can for your crew and the mission, and it's time to hand over to a higher authority, bring this mission to its ultimate conclusion. We now start powering up the command module. There's water all over inside the spacecraft, hanging from the switches, circuit breakers, light bulbs, globs of condensed moisture as big as a silver dollar floating free in the air. And as each one of these systems come to life, the control team's absolutely astounded because the spacecraft was never designed to be put into a deep freeze. Initialized computer, it's integrating the proper trajectory back down to Earth. And now in this final hour, you can feel the emotional content of that room building up because these controllers are sensing victory. But they also know how fragile this victory is. They got to hang in there. And the emotional content of this room peaks at the time we jettison the lunar module because we start speaking to it. And we say, "Farewell, Aquarius, we thank you. You were one hell of a good ship." And then we blow the explosive bolts. It's going to tumble and disintegrate before it hits the Pacific. Now it's time for me to pull my controllers for the final time to give the go for entry. And just as I start my pull, I'm interrupted. Controller comes to me and he says, "Flight, we got to get the crew quick. Battery C's failing. We need power for those parachutes." So we voice the instructions up to the crew to pull the battery C offline, redistribute batteries A and B across the buses so we got powers for the chutes. And it's now time, the entire world's listening to what's going on. It's now time to say adieu to this crew. And the rookie astronaut, Jack Swigert calls down. He says, "You know, all of us up here want to thank you guys down there for the great job you did." And then we get an attaboy from both Lovell and Hayes. We get a little bit of more chit-chat. And then I get a call, "Flight, we've had loss of signal. We're in blackout." Now, blackout is the time period where the fire of entry prevented communication to the spacecraft. At this stage in the space program, we could nail it within a second. We've never missed. And blackout is a very difficult time for every one of the controllers because there's only one thought in mind: did I give the crew everything I needed to, and was my data right? Because from now on, crews are on their own, no give-backs. And we watch all the clocks in the well counting down to zero, and when I finally hit zero, blackout should be over, and I say, "Okay, Joe, give him a call." Kerwin calls, "Odyssey, Houston, standing by." There's no response from the crew. All you hear is static. And we call again and again. It's now 1 minute, and literally every controller in that control room is standing up, staring at those clocks, wondering what the hell went wrong. But in our business, we'll never surrender. We keep calling, keep working. 1 minute and 27 seconds after we should have heard, get a Ray Hope downrange aircraft calls out, Orion 4 has acquisition of signal. And then the aircraft carrier reports radar contact. Then they report the sonic boom. And then in mission control, we see the beautiful picture of the spacecraft under these 3 red and white parachutes. And the emotional release at that instant is so intense that literally everyone is standing crying. And you're frankly embarrassed by your loss of composure. You pull yourself together. Spacecraft hits the water, remains upright. Iwo Jima circles, deploys more helicopters. The parajumpers go in the water to assist this crew out. And this crew that had been living in a meat locker, temperatures ranged between 37 and about 41 degrees for the best part of 4 days, extremely humid, and all they had were the light and cotton coveralls and 3 to 4 pairs of underwear they all put on. But now these guys are in the warm air of the South Pacific, and they are home, and they are alive.